Welcome to Bedtime Stories for Night Owls. Tonight's story is Fire at Bimbleton by L.C. Ockenden. It was a very hot summer. One Saturday afternoon in August, it seemed hotter than ever. Everyone wanted to do nothing but sit in the shade. Even the birds were too tired to fly. Then there was a sudden cry of fire, and all the people in the village of Bimbleton woke up and ran out of their shops and houses. On the hillside, just beyond the village, they could see clouds of smoke coming from one of the haystacks belonging to Farmer Mudd. There were 3 stacks in the corner of the field, and one of them had evidently caught fire. There was the farmer and his wife, with George, Bill, and Harry all doing their best to beat out the flames. George and Bill were throwing clods of earth on the hay, while Harry was tearing to the pond with 2 pails. The mayor rushed out from the town hall. He'd just been eating an ice cream in his parlor and had a white mark all round his mouth. But he remembered to put on his cocked hat to show that he was in official business. He hurried down to the Jolly Farmer and pulled hastily at the fire bell there. But, of course, by this time everyone in the village was out in the street, and Joe Martin, the chief of Bimbleton Fire Brigade, was there outside the fire station. The fire station was really a small shed with a corrugated iron roof. The fire engine was a 2-handled pump on wheels with a long hose. There were 6 firemen at Bimbleton, but of course there were only spare-time firemen. Joe Martin was the painter. Ted Grice kept the ironmonger's shop. Joe Higgins was a plumber. Jack Holloway was the potter at the Jolly Farmer. And Albert Hall was a strapping lad who worked for Farmer Mudd. Mr. Bumbletoes was the 6th. Here were all the firemen, but they couldn't get the fire engine out because the door was padlocked. Joe Martin had 1 key, and Jack Holloway had the other, but neither of them could find it. Jack Holloway had had a hole in his pocket for the last week, and he'd already lost his penknife and 2-pen halfpenny within the last few days. So it seemed he must have lost the key of the fire station as well. As for Joe Martin, he always had so much in his pockets that he could never find anything when it was wanted. Mrs. Martin was there beside him. "Oh, Joe, how many times have I told you to turn your pockets out every week? With bits of string and elastic and sticky sweets, your pockets are disgraceful." The mayor was getting annoyed. You can see his cocked hat bobbing up and down above the heads of the other folk. Come, my man, we haven't all day to waste. Where's the key?" Poor Joe stammered out something which nobody could hear, and began searching his pockets all over again. By this time, most of the folk had run over to the farmer's field to lend a hand with carrying buckets of water or beating out the fire. Ted Grice had hurried back to his shop because he said he had a lot of odd keys and one of them might fit. Joe Higgins had gone to fetch his file and pliers to cut the chain. By now, everyone was full of excitement, and no one remembered how hot it was. "Here, Albert," said Bumbletoes, a bright idea flashing through his mind. "You're a good, strong lad. Come and help me. Go and bring the tarp down to Grice's, and I'll meet you there." Ted Grice was now back at the fire station with an old wooden box full of keys of all sorts and shapes. It looked as though it would take him a week to find one that would fit. The mayor was shouting, and Joe Martin was still fumbling in his pockets. Back came Albert from the Jolly Farmer with the pony trap. Mr. Bumbletoes was waiting for him. No time to waste, my lad. Up with these 2 dustbins onto the tarp. Never mind the price. Up to the field. I'll open the gates. Mr. Bumbletoes had picked up a pair of tongs with the 2 dustbins, and with these he was banging on one of the dustbin lids. Fire! Fire! He shouted. Down to the pond, Albert. The mare galloped across the field to the duck pond. Now, Albert, said Bumbletoes, give me a hand, and we'll fill both these bins with water. Come on, into the pond. Up with the first into the tarp, and we'll leave the other on the side. Put the lid on, or we will spill it all before we reach the rick. Back they galloped to the fire. Mr. Bumbletoes still kept banging on the lid to keep people out of the way. Ah, the very thing, gasped Farmer Mudd. Here, fill up your pails, boys. This will save time. Now then, Albert, back for the other one, shouted Bumbletoes, and off they went again. So, just as the first bin was emptied, the second arrived, and no time was wasted. No one worked harder than Albert and Mr. Bumbletoes. All the time, the other 3 members of the fire brigade had been struggling to open the fire station. Joe Higgins was filing the chain. Ted Grice was hunting in his box of keys, while Joe Martin was clambering up on the roof. He'd given up the search through his pockets in despair. Now, with Higgins' hammers, he was knocking up a part of the roof. He lifted up enough of the roof so that he could squeeze through, and the next minute he had dropped down inside. The mayor was mopping his brow. He felt that he was looking very absurd, standing there in the deserted street, waiting for the fire brigade to get to work. At last, he decided he could wait no longer. Hi, Higgins and Grice, let's go. Let's go do something. It's no use hanging about here with that fire blazing. The 3 of them raced over to the field. The mayor, puffing and blowing, was last, but he was still wearing his hat. The fire was burning less fiercely now. The flames gave way to dense clouds of curling white smoke. Very little was left of the first rick, but the other 2 were saved. Bumbletoes and Albert were still driving the trap to and fro between the burning rick and the duck pond. Well, said Farmer Mudd, thank goodness we've saved the other ricks. Bravo, Bumbletoes. You've worked like a Trojan. Betsy, bring out the glasses and a jug of our own brew. Bumbletoes, said the mayor, who was looking hotter than ever, I congratulate you on your bright idea. Of course, if we had had the fire pump, we should have put out the fire much more quickly, but still, you did very well. Good health to all, said the farmer, holding his glass, and success to Mr. Bumbletoes in his next adventure. The mayor, with his important friends, were going back to the parlor for another ice cream, when they heard loud banging and muffled shouts. Why, it's Joe Martin inside the fire station, said the mayor. They came up to the door. There was the box of old keys on the ground, and there were the hammer and pliers belonging to Joe Higgins. Then came the voice of Joe Martin. I found the key. If you stand there, I'll throw it out through the roof. After the 3rd attempt, he succeeded, and Joe Higgins unlocked the padlock and released the unfortunate Martin. Why, I'm ashamed of you, said the mayor. Our chief fireman, and here you are wasting your time when we have our first fire. Now, where did you find that key? It was in my trousers pocket all the time, only it got wrapped inside my handkerchief, said poor Martin. Well, never let it happen again, said the mayor severely, or you will have to give up your helmet. The end.